Hey everyone, it's Peter Criss from Rock Daydream Nation, and today we're going to do a Kiss episode. I have Bicyclelegs, I have Reed Little from the Contrarians, and we are going to talk about Kiss Unmasked. Deep dive, what we like, what we don't like. How are you going, guys?
Yeah, good.
Doing all right, Peter. Looking forward to this one as always.
Absolutely. Alrighty, so I'll throw to you, Bicyclelegs. Maybe you could
Yeah.
start with just a little bit of the stats about this album, how it went in the charts.
Okay. Well, the album was released on the 20th of May, 1980. It was the follow-up to Dynasty, or Dynasty as it is in America, which was a massive album, had the huge I Was Made for Loving You hit. This album didn't do so well in the United States, but it was a really big album for them here in Australia and also in Europe. Just looking at the best chart positions for it, it got to number 3 in Australia. It got to number 1 in New Zealand and Norway, but it only made number 35 on the US Billboard 200 and number 48 in the UK.
Yeah, so in the US, it struggled. It stumbled into gold status. I suppose that's decent. A lot of bands never get gold status, but by Kiss standards, it was a failure because that broke the, I think, 4 in a row. Their previous 4 albums did attain platinum status, and this album stalled at gold. They didn't tour behind it. I think they might have done one showcase tour just to introduce the new drummer Eric Kerr, who didn't play on the album, and we'll go more into who played and who didn't. But they did an extensive tour of Australia, and it was basically it was like Beatlemania. They came to Australia in 1980. They had the new drummer Eric Kerr. The Lord Mayor gave the keys to the city to Kiss. So you had the town hall, and they were on the balcony, and they basically blockaded Sydney in 1980. Look at the footage. It's amazing. It was like Beatlemania. So we had sort of like a deferred Kiss mania. It was like 5 years after you, or 3 years after you guys. And the entry point for us was Dynasty and Unmasked. So that's why we're very sort of open to this album, comparative to a lot of the true Kiss fans in America who you sort of were raised on Destroyer, rock and roll, and some of the more hard rock albums.
Sure. I will say I had kind of a funny relationship with Unmasked. So I got onto the Kiss bandwagon as Rock and Roll Over was coming out. I actually saw Dynasty in tour. Now I was 11 years old. And Paul Stanley complains endlessly about how, Kiss was starting to appeal to children. Kiss always appealed to children because they were cartoon characters. That was part of their appeal. But they used to be black and white cartoon characters, right? All the way up through Alive 2, they wore black and silver. And then starting with the solo albums, they went color. So now they were full color cartoon characters with a literal Marvel comic book and a cheesy movie, which I happen to love, under their belts. But for something about seeing Dynasty in concert, even at 11 years old, I went, you know what? This is it. This is the apex of Kiss. They'll never reach this again. And I just lost interest in the band. And it wasn't until Lick It Up came out and they went makeup-less that I went back to get their the albums that I had missed. So I bought a cassette of Unmasked. Now, I lived in a small town in Montana. You had to drive 2.5 hours to a big town to someplace where you could buy music. So I bought a cassette of Unmasked, and on the drive back, I put in the cassette, and in the middle of Shandy, it broke.
Oh.
And so I never heard the album. And I was like, okay, it's destiny. I'm not supposed to listen to it. Fast forward to 2007, and I'm listening to an album of cover songs by one of my favorite artists, Jorn. I talk about Jorn every chance I get.
Little plug
And
there for Jorn.
He has a cover of a little tune called Naked City. And I was just going, oh, this song is so good. And flipped through the credits, and I was like, well, it's Kiss? What album is that on? Oh, it's on Unmasked. So I finally picked up Unmasked in 2007. So I had a long distance between the hard rock 70s Kiss and when I listened to Unmasked. And I'm infamous in the Contrarians for liking 80s Kiss better than 70s Kiss. So I have no problem with this album at all. I think it's got a lot of great songs.
Absolutely. Well, it came out in 1980, and I think sonically we might have a quick overall chat and then do a bit more of a deep dive on the songs. I think sonically it covers a lot of genres to me. I think Eddie Trunk described it as power pop, and I think that's fairly accurate. It is very much, there were a lot of power pop bands in 1980. You had the Knack, you had the Romantics, and I think Cheap Trick. And I think a lot of this album falls within that genre. But there's also a little bit of new wave, a little bit of, dare I say, post-punk, just a little bit. But it's certainly a lot lighter, not as hard and riffy as their earlier albums. Another influence is there's a little bit that easy listening, Doobie Brothers. I hear a little bit of Steely Dan. Again, we'll talk more about that when we get to the deep dive to the tracks. What do you guys think?
Well, it's definitely not a hard rock album in the way that the earlier Kiss albums are. Even Dynasty, I mean, it had I Was Made for Loving You, which was, obviously disco influenced. But I think a lot of the other songs on that album still, although they were more slickly produced than earlier Kiss, I think they still had a root in that earlier hard rock sound. This is where I think they really took a big step away from the hard rock sound. And it's funny that, when this didn't get the reception that they were hoping for in the United States, the plan was that the next album was going to be, their return to their hard rock roots. Yeah. And then they ended up coming up with music from the Elder, which, is a, almost prog rock concept album, which I love that album.
I do too, and that's another episode.
But
I do not.
When we did the Contrarians, when we did the Contrarian show on the Elder, my argument was that I think it's a good album, but it's not a good Kiss album. And it was wrong for them, and it certainly was wrong for them in 1981.
Yeah.
But I think they felt that this album was a misstep.
Well,
Unmasked.
I not at the time. I really think that they always put their finger in the air and looking for the trends, like the barometer. And I think they made a decision that they thought hard rock was at a cul-de-sac. They hit a dead end, and I think they thought that the popularity was to chase pop, get in the charts.
I absolutely agree with that. In the US in 1979 and 80, 1970s hard rock was dead. Again, you look at the classic band, Stars was gone. Cheap Trick had gone straight up pop. Aerosmith was dead commercially. Kiss had a double platinum album with Dynasty. Now, I know our kind of forebearer, Martin Popoff, he always says that he thinks Kiss just didn't know what they were doing when they put out Unmasked. And I say, come on, they knew exactly what they were doing. Yeah. Dynasty was huge. It's their it's their sixth best-selling album. So hard rock's dying. Dynasty's huge. Clearly, you go more towards Dynasty, because also coming up is the new heavy metal. You have the new wave of British heavy metals kicking in overseas. Punk just ended. Van Halen has taken over LA. And I think Kiss was looking at that and going, okay, we can't swim in those waters. They do later, but they can't in 1979 and 80. 100%. So we're going to go pop.
Yeah. Well, I think, you know, they had a big hit single with I Was Made for Loving You. And, you know, Kiss sold lots and lots of albums, but they weren't much of a singles band, you know. Before I Was Made for Loving You, really the only hit single they'd had was the live version of Rock and Roll All Night.
And that even wasn't a big hit over here, was it, Bicyclelegs? No. Not really.
No, it really wasn't until I Was Made for Loving You that they had a big hit here in Australia. But I'm thinking more in the US. They had a big hit single with I Was Made for Loving You. And I think when they went into this Unmasked album, not so much the disco, but the pop side of it, they were like, yeah, let's do more of that.
Right. Well, and I think that sometimes people how do I want to say this? They maybe talk a little bit too much about how poppy the album is compared to other Kiss albums, because even though we think of Kiss as a really hard rock band, that comes from Alive and Alive 2. Their studio albums from the 1970s were actually quite poppy. And half of Unmasked, in my opinion, you could have slotted right in on Rock and Roll Over or Love Gun. The main difference being the production sound of it, not the content of the songs.
Well, the production of those albums, I find to my ears, is quite primitive.
Yes.
And I think the production on this album is much more polished. But I'll bring it back. 1980, I think this album sounds very much like the sounds of 1980, what you would hear on the radio, Doobie Brothers, Steely Dan, maybe power pop, the Romantics, the Knack. I think Gene and Paul are chasing the trends, and it's very much got the sound of that 1980s. And that's why it fit in really well in the Countdown charts, which is our local music show in Australia. And it was a huge hit. It was just very much the sounds of 1980.
Right. I'll throw out one more kind of general idea. I think, and I brought this up in other contexts, but after they did the solo albums, Kiss was never the same.
Correct.
And for a lot of reasons. One, because they were no longer writing songs together. But two, I think a lot of it is because they worked with studio musicians really for the first time. And they were like, oh my God, look at what people that are much better than us can do with their instruments. And that Paul and Gene absolutely changed their songwriting. They were no longer writing garage rock. They wrote much more complicated, orchestrated songs that you needed better musicianship to play.
That's a point I was going to bring up, that I think the songwriting on this album is a lot more complex than it had been on previous albums. Even again, you know, Dynasty, I don't think they'd quite gone that way, but this album they really did. And I don't know if that maybe put off some of the earlier fans in the US, you know, because
it
they
unquestionably
were used to the sort of the, you know, they were more, you know, they were used to the more simple, you know, straight ahead, four to the floor sort of Kiss.
Dare I say a bit primitive.
Yeah. And
primitive, not in a bad way, folks.
Yeah.
Primitive in rock is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those early Kiss albums are great, but they are definitely, you know, quite basic. They don't stray from the sort of early formula until you get to the solo albums. And then I think Reed makes an absolutely great point. I think the other thing with the solo albums that really changed the dynamic in Kiss was the rise of Ace Frehley as a songwriter and a singer. You know, before the solo albums, he'd only sung 2 songs on a Kiss album.
His stocks definitely went up.
And then when his album was the best received of the solo albums, I think his stocks really rised. And you
Right.
see that if you see the footage of their tour here in Australia, and I think they toured Europe as well on that 1980s Unmasked tour.
Yeah.
You know, Ace is given a lot of prominence in those shows. He gets to do a lot of his songs. And,
And
yeah,
here's
so
where I break with traditional Kiss fandom, because to me, Ace maintains that he maintains the old Kiss. So Paul and Gene, I think, evolve and become better musicians, and Ace stays right where he was. Now, because of that, Ace is the one who held on to the old fans, right? The people who still wanted their Coke to taste like Coke, whereas Paul and Gene were now new Coke. Did you have new Coke in Australia?
Yeah, it only lasted a year. It was
Yeah, it was a
marketing disaster.
exactly, just like Kiss. So Paul and Gene step it up a level, but nobody wants that. The old fans want previous Kiss, and it's Ace that's providing that. Whereas to
Yeah.
me, I'm going, you know what? I like what Paul and Gene are doing better now. And
Yeah.
Ace now sounds like he's still a garage rocker.
yeah.
Yeah, I
But
don't know if
Paul-
I agree with that. I think his songwriting does get a bit more sophisticated on Unmasked, but you know, it's Critics' Corner. I have a different take on that. Why don't we just go on each of the songs, and then we can bring some more evolution of our arguments regarding
Yep.
Ace and the rest of the lads. So I'm just looking at the track listing as it is on the album here.
Oh, okay.
So,
is your track list? Yeah, that track listing is not actually the track listing as it is on the album.
right.
Like it's like the songs are in a jumbled order.
Well, in that case, I will do it straight off here. So
off the-
we'll do it off the record. So is that you?
Yes.
Let's do that. So Reed, what do you think of that song?
I like it. I don't love it, but I do like it. It's the only song on the album that has no Kiss members listed as writing credits.
Mm.
I think it sounds, again, very slick, very accomplished, and it sounds like a different band. In fact, to me, it sounds like 100% studio musicians. Although if you listen, or excuse me, if you look in Wikipedia, the credits say that Paul plays all of the guitars on this song. But it doesn't sound like Paul to me. It sounds like Skunk Baxter, in fact.
Very echoey in the vocals. You know, is
Lots
that
of echo.
you? Yeah, lots of echo. And I like it. It's got a slight call and response. I don't mind it. I think it's a decent opener to the album. What about you, Bicyclelegs? What do you think?
I actually really like it as an opener to the album. I think it really is. It's one of the songs that is more of a hard rock song, even though it has the more. I mean, some people call Vinnie Poncia's production on this album sterile. I don't think that's quite right,
No.
but it is definitely a poppy production.
Right.
So that takes the edge off it a bit. But I think it's one of the more hard rocking songs on the album. Apparently, Vinnie Poncia brought the song. He had the demo by Gerard McMahon, and he brought it to the band, and Gene and Paul really, really liked it, and that's why they did it on the album. But
Sure.
I think it's a great song. You know, it's one of the few songs where you really hear, like, of the three singers on the album, you hear all three of them. You know, you have Paul doing the lead, and then you have Gene and Ace doing that, you know, is that you coming up my stairs? You know, it really does, you know, it's one of the few songs, even though I don't think they all play on it. Well, obviously, I mean, you know, we'll get into Peter, the fact he doesn't play on the album at all. But it's one of the most band sound, even though it doesn't sound like a Kiss song, it does have, because of the vocals, it's one of the songs that does sound more Kissy to me.
To me, it sounds a little bit 70s glam. It's a little bit of a throwback to that period of the 73, 74 British glam, which I like. So I think it's a really bright, sparkly opener, and I could imagine in that tour, you know, I'd be fine if Paul opened the set with that song. So I don't
Which
mind
you
it.
wouldn't have, because I think they were absolutely locked into starting their shows with Detroit Rock City by
I
that
know,
stage.
I know. Well, I've still got that headspace of hypothetical set lists from Contrarians, Reed. Wish list. The next song was an absolute hit in Australia, and recently, when Kiss did their farewell show, they wheeled it out, and there was a lot of the folk in the Northern Hemisphere on social media saying, "Why did they do that? Why did they? Why did they play just the same old stuff?" So Kiss are slightly tailoring their set list to include Shandy and a few other songs that were hits down here, and that was definitely a top 10 hit. I think it went number 7. I like it. I think it's a well-written song. I like the harmonies. Paul sings nice. It's a pleasant song. What do you guys think of this?
I love it. Again, this is another one that Paul has credit for playing all the guitars. And all I have to say about that is, if he really did, Paul had been practicing his butt off, and his guitar playing game had gotten considerably better. Now, one thing that I think is consistently interesting about Unmasked is that the lyrics are almost demure for Kiss albums. There, Gene doesn't have any pointed sexual puns. It's more romance and less sex. It's almost 1960s in its approach to women. And I found that fascinating. And Shandy's a good example of that.
I think the lineage can be to the previous album and Sure Know Something, because I think I've always said that's a high watermark of Paul's songwriting. I think it's a fine Kiss song. And I think a lot of the songs on this album are sort of like a very close relative of that song.
Yeah. I think this song did well in Australia because it sounded of its time. It didn't sound like Kiss, but that didn't matter so much in Australia, because Kiss really only became into the consciousness of most Australian music listeners with Dynasty. And so it didn't matter that it wasn't a hard rock song, that it sounded almost a bit Doobie Brothers-ish.
Dare I say Sherbet?
Oh,
maybe.
Oh,
I reckon the Teeny Boppers, this is an Australian band that was like big in the mid 70s, but I don't know.
I think Doobie Brothers is right on Bicyclelegs. I think that's a good comparison.
I think I've thrown Bicyclelegs off it a bit.
Oh, no. It's just I've never been a huge Sherbet fan, so. But I love this song. I think it's a beautifully written song. And I'm so, this song got to number 5 on the Australian charts, but not just that. It was the number 23 song of the year. So it wasn't one of those songs that got up into the top 10 and then dropped straight away. It stayed in the charts for ages.
And it didn't hurt that it had an interesting film clip where are they going to reveal themselves? So there was this whole mystique around the album, the shtick around the album about, are they going to, they're unmasked? Are you going to see any, is there going to be any revelation? Alas, there were none. So no, I think it's a solid song.
I will say that the idea of calling the album Unmasked and are they not gonna, I thought that was a little desperate.
I think it should have came out around Lick It Up. So instead of Lick It Up, this would have been the perfect theme, Kiss Unmasked.
Yeah, I don't think they were quite desperate enough to take the makeup off at that stage. It took a few more sort of bomb albums on the charts before they realized they had to do something absolutely out of the blue. And so that was when they decided to take the makeup off.
Bicyclelegs, hold up the album. Do you know there are sort of silhouette photos. Do they actually get the get it right? Like, does Gene, like his eyes and the bits where they actually show the face, do you think they give any hints to revealing that he, I don't know.
A little bit.
Not much.
But I mean, some people could tell more or less what these guys looked like. There was an early interview from like the mid 70s where they were on some TV talk show in America, you know, with like other guests, including, I can't remember who it was, but some comedian. And I think she said to Gene, wouldn't it be funny if under all that makeup there was just a nice Jewish boy? And he said something along the lines of, oh, if only you knew. And she said, I do. You can't hide the hook.
All right.
Yeah.
Talk to Me. I love this song. I think it's my favorite on the album.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a stomper.
Well, I certainly wouldn't go that far. But I will say that of the Ace tracks on the album, this one is my favorite. So clearly we're back in Ace's garage rock territory. It sounds almost exactly like his cover of 2000 Man off of Dynasty. So again, my argument, Ace is not progressing as a musician. But what really makes the song for me, you guys have already talked about the harmonies. This is the song that has the harmonies. When they get, I just want to talk to you, and they have 3 layers of singers on it, it sounds amazing. And it makes me go, I wish Kiss had done that more in their recordings, because they had great singers in the band and they could have really done up the layered vocals.
Yeah, this was the song behind Shandy that was getting a lot of airplay, if my memory serves me correct.
Yeah, it was released as the second single here in Australia, and it just got into the top 40. But I mean, that in and of itself showed that dynamic shift within the band, that an Ace song would be released as a single, you know, and before the solo albums, that just hadn't happened. And it wouldn't, I mean, he'd only sung 2 songs before the solo albums, but I mean, you talk about it sounding like his cover of 2000 Man on Dynasty. I love that cover version on Dynasty. I think it's one of the best things on that album. You know, I mean, and what an obscure Stones song to pick, something from Their Satanic Majesty's Request.
Right.
You know, which is an album I love, but I know a lot of Stones fans don't, including the band themselves. But
I don't mind it. I think it's decent, and he's got that sort of Keith Richards, you know, drawl in his delivery of it. I don't think it's a bad track. I don't think it's my favorite track off Dynasty, but I'm contrarian. I think Easy Living's my favorite, but that's another show. I like this song, Talk to Me, and it's written by Ace, and there's no outside writers, and I think it's pure Ace. It's pure Ace.
Yeah.
So Naked City, I like this a lot. This has got a little bit more complexity. So it's got a few outside writers with Gene Simmons, and I think you're right, Reed. His lyrics in this are quite fine, and Gene can be a very lazy writer, but when he puts his mind to it, he can be really sharp. I think he's quite sharp on this song. What do you guys think of this?
I love this song. Again, there are a lot of songs on this album that I absolutely love. Now, one thing that I really like about the Gene songs on this album is that the bass is way up in the mix.
Yes.
Even before the vocals start, you know instantly that it's a Gene song. And it actually makes me wish they did that with more Kiss songs, because it really adds something. And Gene's a great bass player. He's underrated as a musician.
Yes.
You know, he's thought of as just an ensemble player. I think it's got relatively sophisticated lyrics. I think it's got one of Gene's best vocal performances. All around, just a fantastic song. I will say the Jorn cover is better. Just because after the solo in the cover, he modulates up a half step. And I got so used to that being the way the song sounds when Kiss does it, and he does not do that half step modulation. It sounds off to me. But I think it's a wonderful song.
Yeah, it is a really good song, and it is one of the more sophisticated songs on this album, I think, as far as the writing goes. I agree with the bass thing, but although I think the bass is quite high in the mix on this whole album.
Yes.
Even though Gene's only playing bass on about half the album.
Right.
Because he doesn't play bass on any of the Ace songs. Ace does. He doesn't play bass on Shandy. Some studio musician does. And I think Paul plays bass on something too. Yeah, he plays bass on Tomorrow and Easy as It Seems. So Gene's only playing bass on about 4 songs or 5 songs on this album.
But you notice it. You notice it. And I think Dynasty was responsible for Gene playing bass higher in the mix, because when you're doing disco and that sort of funky bass style, it's more prevalent in the mix. So when you listen to disco, bass is way up in the mix. So I Was Made for Loving You, bass right up. Easy Living, right. Bass right up. And I think there's a continuation in this album where, you know, a song like this, it's a little bit, you know, got a nice little runs. The bass is way more up in the mix.
Yeah.
All right. That's a good one. What Makes the World Go Round? What do you think of that one?
You know, I like it. It's not one of my favorite Paul songs. I think it's solid. It's a good. Was that the end of side 1? I never had this on LP.
Yes,
so,
yes, that is.
Yeah. So, you know, I can't remember who it was. I think Justin Hawkins, maybe from The Darkness, made a comment that you put these kind of sonically not as in-depth songs towards the middle of the album because of the way the vinyl effects, or the physicality of the vinyl effects, what you can get out of a track that's next to the center hub of the album. I thought that was a fascinating comment, but I like it, but I don't think it's particularly special, but I do enjoy it.
It's interesting you say that. I don't know how easy it is to see on here. I don't know if it's on your repress either, Peter, but this is an original pressing. And the grooves actually don't get very close to the center hole at all.
Yeah, okay.
So there's actually about an inch between the end of the song and the center and the label.
Is that a first pressing Bicyclelegs?
Yes, it is.
Wonderful.
It's yeah, this song probably for me is the weakest song on the album. It's okay, but it really doesn't do much for me. I find with the songs on this album, just as an overall thing, I love Gene's songs, all 3 of them. I love Ace's songs, all 3 of them. There are 5 Paul Stanley songs, if you include Is That You? And I think there's some good ones and there's some not so good ones.
Yep. I agree. I think it's not one of the strongest songs on the album, but anyway, flipping the side 2, Tomorrow. What do we think of this one?
Okay, so this may be my contrary. Well, we're going to get to my contrary opinion coming up, but this is my favorite song on this album. I think Tomorrow is pure bubblegum pop. It's just ear candy from start to finish. Paul sounds fantastic. It's catchy. It's upbeat and happy. And yes, it's not hard rock. And I understand that that was the unforgivable sin for a lot of old school Kiss fans. But for me, this song's a 10. I love it.
Okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't quite go that far, but I think it's an excellent side opener again. You know, as Reed said, very bright, very poppy, very catchy. It makes a great start to a side.
And it's very much the template of the album, isn't it? You know, the power pop, bit of bubble gum. Yeah, so, okay, it's sparkly. 2 sides of the coin. I like the lyrics to this. A little bit of Ace-isms. What do you think of this? You know, got a bit of that Keith Richards drawly delivery. What do you think?
But I'm going to let Bicyclelegs. Well, actually, I hate this song. So do you want me to go next, or do you?
Yeah, go ahead.
Would you like
go
to
ahead.
say more positive stuff? I think that this song is crap. I think it's the most primitive song on the album. You know, Ace is basically singing the guitar melody, which is always, you know, that's like Ozzy Osbourne level, not sophisticated songwriting. I can't believe you called out the lyrics as good. I think it has the most insipid lyrics that Ace ever put down on a track. And that is saying something, because the man cannot write lyrics. Let's just look at this. I'd like to say a word or two about the women we all seem to know. They're all around us. They're everywhere. You meet them this place and then meet them there. Then you decide to pick a mate because you're tired of all those dates.
I think that's genius. Seriously, sometimes at the most primitive, rock lyrics can be like, yeah. I don't know. I don't have an issue with that one. Compared to some of the other, you quoting Kiss lyrics. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Let's go into some later albums in the 80s. I can tell you what.
You know, one of the things I liked about Ace's lyrics, like right from the get-go, is he didn't tend to deal in the sort of really bawdy double entendres that Paul
it's
and
street
Gene
talk.
did.
It's like street language.
But what I really like about this song is I think Ace really stretches himself as a singer on this one. He gets into like really high registers for Ace. And he manages it. He doesn't sound screechy. He hits those notes, and I think it's one of his best performances just as a vocalist. Because sometimes the criticism with Ace as a vocalist was that he'd start out in a song fairly well and then he'd sort of peter out towards the end. And I think he manages to maintain a good energy all the way through this song in his singing. So I like, it's probably my least favorite of the three Ace songs, but I still think it's pretty good.
Yeah, look, I really like this song, and it's Ace is, look, he's one of my favorite personalities in the band, and it's got a lot of personality, this song. So Critics Corner, Reed, Critics Corner. She's So European. I like this song as well.
Yeah, this is another one of the absolute power pop. This is Gene just going, you want power pop? I'm going to write you the most power poppy song I can, along with the song that ends the album. We'll get to that one eventually. But yeah, I think it's, again, just like Tomorrow, it's catchy, it's upbeat. For Gene, it's got a really restrained lyric. And I think he sounds good. I think Gene sings so well on this album.
Yeah.
Well, he did around this period, even in the going into the Elder. I think his vocals, he was really trying. Well, actually, when you think about it, going back to the solo album, I think he was trying to put a bit of energy and effort in regards to actually singing a melody. But that's another story.
Well,
I really like this song.
With the solo albums, I'm a bit contrarian in as much as Gene's solo album is my second favorite of the two. I like it better than Paul's. And I like it because he's trying different stuff. And I really respect him for that. And I think he started to bring some of that into his songwriting in Dynasty and then Unmasked. And the thing that I love about She's So European is it's just so much fun. This song is just so much fun. If you can't listen to this song and have a smile on your face, there's something wrong with you.
No, no, I like it. I like the riff. There's kind of like a little call and response riff, between the band members. I like the dynamics. This was played a lot in that era. I recently saw some footage on a Kiss cruise where they basically have a concert and they play just deep cuts. So you got all the Uber Kiss fans that pay hundreds and hundreds of dollars to, hold court with Kiss. And they played this song and they were struggling. They were really struggling because the arrangements in this song, it's like a little bit of a Trojan horse, a little bit more difficult than you would think. And yeah, they didn't quite sort of carry it off. But no, I like this song a lot. I think it, and this was probably, I seem to recall in the day, Bicyclelegs, this got a little bit of airplay as well. We might have seen that on the music stations. Was this released as a single as well?
No.
No. Okay. Well, it should have been.
Yeah, it would have been a good single, I think.
Yeah. All right. Easy as it seems.
To me, Easy as It Seems is the most dated song on the album. It absolutely sounds like what was popular on the radio in 1979 and 80. So I don't think it's a bad track. Again, I think it's well performed. I think it sounds good generally, but it lacks that timeless quality that you get from the best music, right?
Bit too much Christopher Cross, maybe a little bit. I don't know. There's a little synth line to me that really dates it. It seems it's very, I don't know, easy listening. I don't know, middle of the road, almost yacht rock. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think again, I like this song better than What Makes the World Go Round, but I do think this is one of the Paul songs that doesn't quite work as well. It just seems and also to me, the songwriting on this song is a little by the numbers.
Yeah, unlike
I think almost literally. Yeah, I think it was chasing. They were like, here, what's popular? Yeah, this is, Christopher Cross yacht rock is popular. Oh, we're gonna write a song like that.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I think we all agree on that one. Torpedo Girl. What do you think about that song?
So of the 3 Ace tracks, I like Talk to Me. I hate Two Sides of the Coin. Torpedo Girl is interesting. I think Torpedo Girl is the most interesting musical track on the album. It has that really weird do 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 do. That's a really strange line. Unfortunately, Ace, for me, whether he's a better vocalist on this album than he was previously, I won't argue, but his voice has always been nails on a chalkboard for me. And I don't like his voice. I don't like his lyric, but I like the music. So I put this in the middle of the 3 Ace tracks for me.
Yeah. What about you, Bicyclelegs? What do you think?
I think this song has the best bass on it, and it's played by Ace. That doom, 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 it's got a bit of funk to it, which you don't expect from a Kiss song. And I really, really like that. Again, same with She's So European. I think that the thing that I like about this song is it's just so much fun. It's obviously not meant to be taken seriously. Right from the beginning, where you have all the submarine sound effects and that sort of thing. It sort of primes you straight away that this song is here just to be fun and silly and up tempo and enjoyable. Doesn't have it as much, it doesn't have a great deal of substance to it, but I think it's just got a joy to it that carries the song for me.
I think this song actually is like a reminisce of an earlier Kiss, couple of earlier Kiss riffs. It's sort of, I don't know, I've had it in my head that it sort of recalls maybe some early Kiss riffs, but done in a different way. But look, it's full of energy. I like it. And I like all of the Ace songs because he just oozes personality. No, he's not the greatest singer. Is he the greatest guitarist? No, but he's got personality and he is what he is. And I like this song a lot.
The closest musically would be the track Mr. Speed off Rock and Roll Over, which is a deep album cut. Ace could come up with some interesting lines. He could.
Yep. And then the finale is you're all that I want. You're all that I want. You're all what I need. What do you think of this song?
Yeah. Now again, and Bicyclelegs, I agree with you that the bass is higher in the mix in this album. And by the way, I think it's hilarious that people refer to the production on Unmasked as flat, because the production on the early Kiss albums is just so uniformly terrible. Except for Destroyer. The idea that people would have anything negative to say about a better production job is
like
that's so human.
I think that debut is a test case for great songs, lousy production. How good that album how much better it would have been if it had better production.
Now, Dressed to Kill, that's a flat album. This album has bass, it has middle, it has treble, it's got everything.
Yeah. I don't think you could get $1 million stereo player and it wouldn't make it sound one iota better.
But I will say on Gene's songs, I think the bass is a couple of dB higher in the mix than it is certainly on Paul's songs. You can tell, which again to me is an indication that these guys were not in the studio at the same time. Right. It's an album mostly of individuals coming together occasionally.
Yes. And I think the rot started with probably Destroyer, where they were becoming more individuals and less of a band. And then you had the solo albums. But just briefly coming back to this song, what do you guys think of this song?
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, it's probably my least favorite of the Gene songs, but I still think it's not a bad album closer.
Yeah.
Okay. And lyrically, look at what has happened in Gene's song. I mean, you're all that I want, you're all that I need. How far away is that from Love 'Em and Leave 'Em?
Right.
You know?
Or Put Your Log in My Fireplace. Oh, sorry, that's...
No, that's a terrible lyric. Still better in Two Sides of the Coin.
Or Love is Sweet, So Insane, Come and Lick My Candy Cane.
You know what? We could be quoting Spinal Tap lyrics here. Seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just... look, I think this is the golden era of Gene, lyrically. And musically, he was focused. I think when he's focused, he comes up with some good stuff. And I think this was the golden era of Gene, the golden era of Ace, in my opinion. Paul. Peter was nowhere to be seen. So I think we've got to just briefly talk about Peter. Peter didn't play on the album. You had Anton Fig.
Yes.
And his drumming is sparkling.
Yeah, his drumming's really good on this album, I think.
Yeah. And I don't know. I've read stories that he was kind of hoping to be in the band, but he just didn't have the right look.
Yeah.
And I have to guess now. I'm not as much of a Kissologist as some people, so I've never read books talking about Anton Fig's participation. But Anton was tight with Ace.
Yeah.
And at this point, I would have to guess that was not a selling point to Paul and Gene.
Because it's all political, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Of course, he got the gig as a David Letterman's drummer for the next 20 years. So I think he made out all right on the deal.
Oh, yeah. And he played in Freely's Comet as well. So.
Yeah, but he couldn't tour with them because David Letterman wouldn't let him tour.
Yeah. I think, I've read the Kiss story a few times, and I think the whole thing about having Peter still on the album cover, it's a little bit cheeky. And he was on the in the film clip for Shandy, and he was the last person in the film clip, Bicyclelegs. He's sitting in the dressing room and apparently reading it. He was in tears. He was left alone, and it's all very messy. That was basically the last clip that you saw the Fabulous Four. Imagine what Eric Carr would have been like on this album. Bit more oomph, maybe.
Yes.
Anton Fig, it's good, it's solid drumming, but could you imagine
Well,
Eric Carr playing on this album, or is he a little bit more to Cosy Powell, to, you know, the double kicks? Is it not right for this type of music?
I think his playing would have been good, but I don't know that it would have had the oomph because of the production. I mean, you look at the production on the Elder, his drumming does not have oomph on that album. It's good playing. It's really good playing. But the drums don't sound great on that album. And then you get to Creatures of the Night and they're just enormous. So,
yeah,
I don't know. I like Anton Fig's playing on this album. So I you know, and I'm not sure that Eric did a whole lot different when they played these songs live on the Unmasked tour anyway.
Yeah, I don't pay a whole lot of attention to the drumming, and even I noticed that there are some really good little fills and moments in the drums on this album. So I think Fig was the right guy. He definitely fit in this style of music, especially. I don't think Anton Fig is a particularly hard rock drummer, but for this you know, power pop studio style production, he's right on top of it.
Yeah. And there were additional musicians that played on this album. Bruce Kulick.
No, Bob Kulick.
Bob Kulick. Yeah, he played on this album. So,
sometimes called the uncredited fifth member of Kiss, because while he gets a credit, it doesn't say what he played, right?
Yeah, well,
no, it just says additional guitar.
Right.
Yeah. I think a lot of people were actually surprised when a lot of true, you know, fans sort of many years later looked at, you know, did a deep dive look at all these albums to see who actually played on these albums. Like when I first heard that Peter Criss only played on one song on Dynasty, I was actually quite shocked. Because we were sold that tale that it was just the awesome foursome they were playing on it.
Yeah.
So
that's part of the legend, right? Bands, especially bands that make it on their image, they have to manage that image.
Yeah.
Not that Kiss didn't have songs, but it was the image that was selling kids lunchboxes and school backpacks and action figures, right?
Yeah.
And of course, this would happen again with Creatures of the Night, having Ace's picture on it and him having nothing to do with that album. So
absolutely. And I think part of the Kiss story is it's the personalities that really, the clashes, the personality conflicts that really controlled their destiny, not necessarily musical.
Yeah.
You know, and as we look at these albums from 32 years down the road, 42 years, geez, I'm old. I want it to be 32 years. It's all looking at it now based on what we know it did, right? So at the time they thought it was going to be huge. I have to think that Gene was watching Kiss go like this and he went, I'm going to be a movie star because this rock thing is dying. Whereas Paul is going, I got to save this band, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
So their destiny diverges at that point.
Absolutely. Out of all the players at Unmasked, and this is probably into a different episode, but reading a lot of interviews, Gene was definitely the most insecure about taking the mask off. And he said it took him a long time, even in stagecraft, not wearing the mask of what's my persona going to be? What am I going to do? So out of all of them, I think Paul was comfortable. I think a lot of the other members were quite okay, but Gene was definitely the most. And you think he's quite a very bold and sort of ostentatious sort of character, but he was actually quite insecure about, you know, sort of revealing, taking the mask off, and what was his stagecraft going to be? Because a lot of you know, the show is around the demon, the blood splitting, blood spitting and doing this and that. What's he going to be without
fire?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and if you look at the band as they were at the time that they took the masks off, you had Eric, he was sitting behind the drum stool. He was going to keep doing the same thing he was doing regardless. And Vinny had only been in the makeup for a few months. So he hadn't really had much of a time to develop a costumed masked persona as such.
Right.
And when he did have a persona on stage, it didn't work with the band and he ended up getting fired. So.
Right. And, you know, I say over and over again, 70s Kiss was not going to make it in the 80s. No matter how much people decades down the road, or even in 1996, were all about the nostalgia. In the 1980s, guys in makeup playing 1970s hard rock was not going to fly.
No,
They
I agree.
had to make big changes.
I agree with you, especially when those earlier albums are very riff-tastic, very basic, primitive. That's not a bad thing, but it just didn't cut it in that sort of 1980s hard rock, you know, the British wave of new heavy metal, or the glam, hair metal scene.
And then, of course, the other thing you really had happening in the music scene in America at that time was the second British invasion. And that was, you know, synth pop and new romantic and that sort of thing. And it's like, there just was no room for a band like Kiss were in the 70s.
Well, they were kind of flirting with that imagery of the Elder. I know we're getting off topic a little bit, but Paul and Gene with short hair and the sort of costumes, they were definitely flirting with that. But the Elder was just in every bargain bin around the world.
I have to say my favorite thing about Paul's Elder costume is he's in like the aerobics outfit. Did you guys have the aerobics craze in Australia? There was a time in America where they actually, you could turn on the TV and there were like sexy women in leotards doing aerobics. Those were shows that you could watch. So when Paul did the aerobics outfit, I thought that's pretty funny.
Yes, absolutely. All right, any final words on this album? I guess from my perspective, I like it. I think it's a very good album. That's all I've got to say. And I think it's been unfairly put way down in the discography. I think there's a lot of Kiss albums that are much worse than this.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you think of albums that they did later on, Crazy Nights and Hot in the Shade. Funnily enough, Hot in the Shade, they got back together with Vinnie Poncia to write 4 or 5 songs on that album. So
some decent songs on that album, but anyway.
Yeah, but it's way too long.
It is too long. I actually do. I enjoy that album. My thing with Unmasked is old style. The people who like the 1970s hard rock are never going to accept this album because it doesn't sound like Kiss. I think we are far enough away from it that you can simply evaluate it for what it is, and it's a great album. It's lots of fun. It's got lots of energy. It's got good songs. And
for me, I'm always going to like this album because it's the Kiss I grew up with.
Yes, that was our entry point.
You know, I mean, and again, with the Elder, that was, you know, that did better here in Australia. It wasn't huge here, but it did better here than it did anywhere else. And I always argue that it was because of the choice of single, because in the US, the choice of single was A World Without Heroes. Beautiful song, but so unlike Kiss that people were just scratching their heads and going, what the hell is this?
I think also the album cover, a hand and a door knocker.
But the single here in Australia was I, which is a catchy as hell rock and roll song. And it's still one of my favorite songs on that album. So
yeah. Well, I think this is an album that you could put on now. And if you want to go back in time, I have a time capsule to what AM or FM radio sounded like in 1980. I think this would be a good start because it's definitely a capsule of 1980. All right, guys, thank you for that. Please, you know, like, subscribe to Rock Daydream Nation, check out Bicyclelegs on his channel, plenty of fantastic content. Check Reed on the Contrarians, lots of stuff. Please put your comments, what you think of this album. I'm sure that there's going to be some varied commentary, but I welcome that. And we'll probably do another Kiss corner, show very shortly. So see you soon.
Bye.